Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Shall we get started? Last day of the conference, Friday morning. Our keynote this morning will be a fascinating keynote about really modern technology. Neil Croft will be speaking to us about Bitcoin, a digital treasure. Those of you who have invested in Bitcoin might not quite agree with that as far as the monetary parts are concerned, but still, it's a digital treasure. Neil has the optimum position at the university. He's a senior lecturer at the Department of Informatics, University of Pretoria. And at that point, no admin, no management, you can do what you want to. He lectures third-year advanced programming course, and he has an honors course in mobile computing. One of his legs is in academia, the other one is industry, and that's a great situation to be in. He was awarded a PhD in computer science at University of Pretoria. He has a passion for disruptive technologies, both from a technical perspective and from a social perspective, such as, for instance, mobile technologies, cellular phones, blockchains, bitcoins, and other financial technologies. He has published various papers at this conference, for example, on Bitcoin mining power plants, as well as his students have published here, the economic sustainability of cryptocurrencies. He's also himself published papers on short message service security and so-called silent SMS, denial of service attacks, the wonderful things, the security of our infrastructure. And he's also published on GSM forensic and IT governmental issues. We're looking forward to this. Neil, thank you very much.
Okay, morning everyone. I thought, and if you guys, some of you guys know me, I think a little bit differently. So I thought, how can I present a keynote to guys in a different field to what I'm in? And I know for myself, when we go through presentations, we kind of go through the same rigmarole of an introduction, who I am, all of those nice things, what the paper's about, give you guys some intro into the topic at hand. And then we leave like 5 minutes for questions, and that's really what everyone wants to ask at the end of the day. So I thought, let's do this in reverse. So I'm going to actually start with the Q&A. All right, so here are my questions. And these are the questions I pose to my students and anyone that attends my lectures on fintech or blockchain or Bitcoin. And I ask, when I start, for the guys to come up with an equation, and the equation is to complete what success is, what success means to you. And what this does, it gets guys thinking on what does it mean to be successful in this life? What do we aim or want to achieve? What are our goals? Where are we going? And pretty much 90% of my students will answer this question, success equals money. Okay, this is how we have been conditioned over time to think that success is equal to money, and we all know that money is the root of all evil. So therefore we can deduce that success is the root of all evil. So when we start, we always talk about money. We're all here and we all have our day jobs to do one thing, and that's to earn money. Pretty much 90% of us don't enjoy our work that we do, but we have to pay bills, so we have to earn some money to pay those bills. So the question then arises, where does money come from? Who knows? Who creates money? The president. Yeah, he creates money for himself, but so where does money come from? And I think following on from that, who creates it? What are its origins? So I think if we look back in history, and there's some debate around this, on the origins of money. So some people say that there is mention, and if you are religious in nature, there is mention of the term money or a value of exchange in the Bible. There are other reports that 300 AD, after the death of Christ, we start talking about money. And at the end of the day, what it is a medium of exchange. It's essentially what it is. So it boils down to, long ago we had 1 cow, 2 pigs, 5 chickens, and we needed to trade. Now we can't necessarily go and divide those animals into fractions in order to trade, So we came up with a mechanism or a tokenization or representation of value for those entities, and then we could go and trade. So the early reports of money are around what we know today as the conch shell. So they use the concept of representation using shells. All right, what's the problem with that? Where do we find shells? On the beach. So if we want to become really wealthy, what do? We just go to the beach, walk around and pick up shells. And unfortunately, 2,000 years odd later, we are still doing the same thing. We're still picking up shells off the beach, because that is how the economy is set up and how it's run. Okay. Because why? When we need more money, we simply go and print more money to sustain an economy. And why do we need to sustain the economy? Because there are certain things that have to occur in order to create growth. Okay. So, next question. Who determines the value of money? Who determines that the rand is sitting at 14.80 to the US dollar?
Supply and demand.
Okay. Supply and demand and perception. And an underlying perception of a value. And sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong, but at the end of the day, there is a perception that the dollar is very strong. And there's a perception that the rand is very weak. And therefore, people trade on that perception. Okay. So why does money exist today as a medium of exchange? We kind of have covered that. Why do we need a debt-based economy? Okay. So I always like to ask this: who here is in debt? Maybe I should ask it the other way around, and then we'll get one or two hands. Okay. So why does debt exist? If you want to live in the future, you need debt. So basically, in order to grow an economy, we need something called debt in order to create more money, in order to sustain the economy. So in effect, what we are doing is we are creating money out of nothing. Okay, and this is now the biggest problem that we face in the world today, is we need to keep printing more and more and more money. All right, and if I ask you guys, is South Africa in debt? Yes. Is America in debt? Yes. Is China in debt? Yes. So who do we owe all this money to? To each other. Exactly. We created this debt-based model where we all owe each other. And we never ever repay that money. Okay, so we just keep adding to this bigger pot at the end of the day. So then what is inflation? And that goes hand in hand with debt. Inflation is your buying power. So essentially, as we sit here, we're all getting poorer. Literally every minute that we're sitting here, we're getting poorer. Why? Because the value of your money is deflating. It's getting less and less. Your buying power gets less and less over time. So today I can buy a McDonald's burger and a meal for 50 Rand. In 10 years' time, I can just buy the burger. In 50 years' time, I can just buy the chips. In 100 years' time, I can just buy literally here, the box. All right, so that is what inflation does for us. All right. So these are just some of the questions around money. And we somehow are all driven by it, and yet we don't fully understand it and how the economy actually works. Okay, so next question. What is fractional reserve banking or lending? So what this means, if you go and take your money and you put it in the bank, I put 100 Rand in the bank then uses that money to lend it to other people, and they make money off your money. Okay, best business model in the world. You don't spend a cent, and you make money off other people's money. But what they'll do is take a percentage of that money, for example, 90% of that money, and lend that money. Then they keep 10% in reserve. Why do they need to keep that 10%? Is because if there is a call on that money, meaning people go to the bank and say, please give me all my cash back, the bank has to fulfill that request. So this then becomes the next biggest problem in the economy right now, is fractional lending. And some of the biggest banks, one example is Deutsche Bank in Europe or in Germany, they are sitting at 98% fractional lending. So it basically means if 2% of the population that has money at the bank calls on that money, all simultaneously at the same time, the bank collapses. And we've seen that in South Africa, and we've seen it in Greece recently, when creditors come and say, please give me all my money, and the bank physically doesn't have that money because they've lent it out. Okay, so that's then one of the problems. So what is the value of global debt right now? So there was a report released a while ago, $247 trillion. That is how much the world is in debt. So you can go and do the calculation, and someone did this, and I thought it was quite interesting. If we can pay off $10,000 on that debt per day, $10,000 is quite a bit of money. Per day, it will take us 60 million years to pay that money off. So in essence, we're never going to pay that money off. But it is required in order to keep sustaining inflation and keep growing. Okay. How much money is dropped into the South African economy each year? Okay, this is unconfirmed. I've heard from a number of people. Around 160 billion rand gets dropped into the South African economy each year. And when I say dropped, where does it come from? It literally comes from the Reserve Bank. And they go, there we go, 160 billion rand. And all of you are going, how come we can't see that money? All right. So the question then is, how do we determine that value? Who determines that 160 billion?
Are we allowed to also?
Yes? Yeah, sure.
How or where do they drop it? I mean, they cannot just put it in the street. Where do they
It
drop
goes
it?
to the Reserve Bank.
Oh, yeah, and so they can lend it out to the other banks.
They
is that-
distribute it via the banks and via
So it's not
governments,
necessarily
etc.
physical money then, it is then electronic money, most of it, or...
Yeah, it's not physically printed 160 billion. Yeah. Only about, I think the report I've seen, between 3 and 5% of physical cash is printed. The rest is all digital.
Digital.
Yeah.
And then the other question on the previous page, actually, so in previous days, like for us, and I think in America at some stage where you had gold to the value stashed up somewhere, that I think stopped some other time.
Yes.
Are you going to touch on that later or not?
Correct, yeah. So basically, when we talk about fiat money, the current money situation is it used to be backed by gold, meaning we had gold reserves backing the amount of money printed. And if you go and look at old South African notes, you will see on that note, it says the bearer of this note can go to the bank and request this amount in gold. Okay. We stopped the gold standard, I think in South Africa in 1983, somewhere there. And basically what we are doing now is printing money out of thin air. So then the question still remains is how do we get to the 160 billion that gets pushed into the economy each year? So if you look at it from a broad sense, it is basically one big boys club. There's something called the IMF. Do we know what the IMF is? International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Actually, when I went to Basel in Switzerland, the World Bank headquarters sits there. It's the most uninteresting building I've seen. It's big, brown and round. But pretty much the whole world is determined from that building. Okay. So literally the valuation of a country comes from its GDP, its gross domestic product, where we see how much we are importing, exporting, and it determines the value of the country, and then this boys club gets together and says, okay, what is your country valued at and how much is needed to sustain this economy? Kind of interesting. Okay. So from that, do you trust your bank? Who here trusts their bank? Or comment?
I think you've missed one question, though.
Yes.
What is a bank?
What is a bank?
Yeah, because if you look at the way that Discovery is going and post-bank and all those sort of things,
Yeah.
it's changing the way banking is. And you've got to ask the question, what is a bank first?
A bank
Before
is a
you ask
yes.
the
A
question,
bank
do
is
you
a trusted party that's keeping your money. In essence, base level. Okay, we can argue its role in society and its valuation and what products it puts into the market and things like that. But in essence, instead of putting your money under your pillow, you go and put it at the bank. And we've been conditioned to do that since pretty much myself. I was 6 years old, and now suddenly I'm getting 10 Rand pocket money a month. And my parents say to me, well, what are you going to do with this money? You need to save it. Where are you going to put it? You're going to put it in a bank. And we all had those bob cards when we were growing up. Okay, kind of shows our age. But that's how we were conditioned at that young age. What do you do with your money? And you have to save it. But what no one tells you is when you're saving your money, you're actually losing. Because if inflation is higher than the amount you're earning on that interest, you are getting poorer. Okay. So, do you trust your bank? Question, comment.
We must just understand South Africa's banking environment is hugely regulated. So if you don't have a banking license, you're out.
Correct.
And we think there's 5 or 6 banking licenses. It's about 168, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And then also the liquidity. I mean, that fractional lending in South Africa very different because the Reserve Bank requirements are very strenuous on that.
Correct. Cool. Next question on that. Do you trust your government? Maybe I should leave that one. We won't answer that right now because elections are coming up. But in essence, your government determines the valuation of your fiat money, and it also determines how we trade with the rest of the world, and it determines ultimately our GDP, which determines how much money comes back into the economy, which determines whether we are growing our economy or not. Okay. And do you trust an IT system more than a human being? And I think this is where the role of the bank has changed somewhat. Is because we used to ultimately 100% trust our banks, and we've seen there are flaws in the banking system because banks have collapsed. Okay, even in South Africa, Sambo has collapsed. Sambo they were at the forefront of technology. They had the first online banking system called 2020, and you got a nice little credit card, and nobody had to go to banks anymore. And then Sambo folded because there was, I think, R1 trillion call on the bank. Okay, so ultimately now we're reaching the stage of a society that is dictated by individualism. We are all more concerned about ourselves than we are concerned about the greater population. If you guys notice this, maybe it's just me because I'm teaching young minds at the university. We only care about ourselves. And unfortunately, individualism will be the death of democracy. And that's kind of a bold statement, but we'll wait and see if that holds true or not. Because democracy has been described, I think it was Truman that said this, democracy is like a sheep and 2 wolves deciding on what to have for lunch. There's more bad in the world than there is good, so democracy ultimately will fail. But that I think we can leave for a later stage. Okay. I don't claim any ownership on any diagrams. This is just simply pulled off the internet, but I think it holds true because money is created by the bank out of thin air. Okay. And why I say this is because whenever you talk to people about blockchain and Bitcoin, the first statement you'll hear around the braai is it has no value. There's no intrinsic value. But how does money have intrinsic value when we're also creating it out of thin air and it's not backed by gold? Question.
I think one of the important points that you need to make very clear is that that thing that you've labeled the state bank is usually not owned by the state. This is very important to realize. The Federal Reserve in the US is not owned, it's not an American government institution, neither is the Bank of England.
Yes.
And this is really important because it means that every note that's printed, they're getting, I think in the US it's something like 6%. So this is actually the basis of a system of slavery. So I don't know whether you were getting to that, but...
I am. I like your thinking, I think...
But maybe I'm jumping ahead of your presentation.
A little bit, because I'm going in reverse. I think now we're starting to meet the middle ground where the questions are coming from both sides. I just put this in because we have this delusion that if you have more money, you suddenly are happier. And we've been conditioned like this, and I think that's just really my point, is over time is how do we condition people? How have we controlled people throughout history? And if you go and look, in history we've controlled people via 2 mechanisms. The first is religion, and the second is money. And although we live in a free country, I think if we look at it and analyze it, not one of us is actually free because we are controlled by money. A lot of what happens in our life is determined by how much money we have, the valuation of it, and the perception of people, of yourself, if you've got more or less of it. Okay. What is the role of society, or in society, of rich and poor people? And this is now the question that's coming up over and over in this country in particular, because we have pretty much the highest unemployment rate we've ever had. I think it's sitting at 27%. Okay, it's kind of interesting because the guys say, and studies have shown, when you have a population around 25% unemployed, you run the risk of having a coup. Okay, so our biggest problem in this country right now is not our politicians shouting their mouths off or doing silly things or not silly things, or us talking to the Chinese or Eskom bailing out or SAA. Our biggest problem is we run the risk of a coup in this country because people don't have jobs. Yeah.
So with that, how many people are actually banked, as in actually hold a bank account in this country, let alone in Africa?
Look, those figures also fluctuate because, you know, what is banked?
Yeah.
Does bank mean we've got or access via mobile to a bank? These e-wallets, is that real banking? So the definition of banking for now is actually very loose. I think still, you know, everyone transacts. So the fact that you are transacting via some system, in theory, is banking. So we can almost assume everyone is banked, but not the traditional way. Okay. So the role of rich people. What should rich people do in society? And we all know what rich people do. They make more money. The rich become richer and the poor become poorer. We've heard that saying before, and it holds very true. Because the rich need to exploit either a person or a system to become richer. And the poor need to work harder in order to sustain in that economy. Okay, so why we are in recession at the moment is because our middle class, which I would imagine is all of us, has to have a lot of debt in order to grow the economy. But what's happening is the middle class is reducing in size, which means we have less debt, which means we can't grow the economy. And the rich people, when they can't grow their wealth, take the money out of that situation. Okay, so there's reports, I've got some friends at Standard Bank, 100 million rand is leaving Standard Bank every month, offshore. Okay, that's a scary number. Okay, and if we add that to how much the Guptas have taken out of South Africa, which is reported at around R1 trillion, we've got a big problem. Because the economy cannot sustain itself anymore. So that then becomes the big question. So what is legal tender? And I think this question comes up over and over. Why can't we all own dollars? If the rand is so weak, why can't we just go and buy dollars? Because it is illegal. You guys know this? Okay, you can only buy dollars, and you'll see this when you travel, when you've got a plane ticket and a passport. And when you come back, they kind of say, well, how many dollars do you have? And if it's under a threshold, then you're all right. So why do we have a legal tender? Because if I said to you all right now, you can go and buy dollars, what's going to happen? Pretty much all of us, at least half of us, will go and change all our South African rands for dollars. So what's going to happen to the South African rand? It's going to collapse. So the whole term legal tender is a mechanism to sustain an economy so that no one can affect that economy with an adverse effect. Okay. So I don't like the word illegal. Illegal for me means you can and should be able to do it, but we don't want you to do it. Okay. So why is South Africa in recession? I think we've kind of covered that. Okay, so we've had negative growth over the last, I think, 2 quarters, although it's minimal, but it is negative. So we are literally going backwards. We are not growing. And when we are not growing, or when you're an emerging economy and people don't see you growing, they're not going to put their money in because they're not going to get a return. Okay. So in order to kind of lift us out of this recession, we need to go and do something. We need to go and create jobs, and that sounds like a very high and mighty thing to go and do. But if the rich people are holding on to their money and not putting it back into the economy, we can't create jobs. So the problem shouldn't be, let's all think and wrap our heads around creating jobs. We should be going to the rich people and saying, why aren't you earning money out of this economy? Why are you going elsewhere? And they're going elsewhere because they get higher returns. Okay. Why does everyone push the lift button when it's already pushed? I thought I'd throw this in. Have you noticed this? Whenever you're standing at a lift and the button's already pushed, some idiot will walk next to you and push it again, thinking that it's going to call the lift faster. Okay. And this, unfortunately, is the mindset in our economy. we do the same thing over and over and over. And we know it doesn't work, and yet we still carry on applying the same principles. Okay, so I think that's important. Why is money laundering illegal? So if you strap $100,000 to your chest and try and fly anywhere in the world, what's going to happen? You'll get arrested. But if I put $100 million on my cell phone, it's not a problem. Why? Because no one can see it. So money laundering, we all move money around, but once again, we're trying to curb how much leaves the country. Okay. And a lot of people now might get caught in South Africa. Here's the example. If we're taking 100 million out every month from Standard Bank into the Isle of Man, offshore accounts, into Madagascar, into Mauritius, wherever we are taking our money out, literally the government can say tomorrow, guys, you're not allowed to bring any foreign money into South Africa. Then what's going to happen? We're going to have a mass exodus of people from South Africa, not because there's no work or anything, because they can't get hold of their money. Everyone's going to go and live on the Isle of Man. So we'll wait and see what happens there. And I think my last question is, why do we never ask the right questions? Okay, so here's the example. A while ago at the airport, there was the biggest heist in South African history. $20 million was stolen. What questions did we ask? And the media went crazy on it. The first question they said is, who did it? The second question is, how did they get away with it? The third question is, did they have insiders to get the money out? Nobody asked the actual question that should have been asked is, first of all, why was it dollars? Because dollars is illegal tender in South Africa. And the second one, who owned it? Whose money was it? So we ask everything else but not the right questions. And I think that's still our problem in terms of carrying on and thinking on how we can improve our economy. Okay, so let's talk about why I'm actually here and what you guys want to know. So the first question is, what is blockchain? So I'll go through a few of these and then we can talk about all of them. So what is blockchain? What is Bitcoin? Why was it created? Who created it? What problem is it actually solving? What is hash-based proof of work? Because we hear this all the time. Why is Bitcoin called a cryptocurrency? And why, and this is in my opinion, it is the most genius thing I've ever seen in my life. Okay, so what is blockchain? If we take an analysis of blockchain, a blockchain or a chain is a linked sequence of something. Okay, and in this case we are linking blocks. What are in those blocks? Those blocks contain valid transactions. So in essence, what we are doing is we are creating this timeline sequenced event linked blocked of valid transactions. That's all blockchain actually is. And people get confused and interchange Bitcoin and blockchain in the same sentence. Blockchain is the underlying technology. Bitcoin is the application of that technology. Okay, so if we take an example, the internet is the technology. The World Wide Web is the application that sits on top of the internet. And then we also get applications that sit on top of applications. So now on the internet, when we talk about multimedia and streaming and all those things, that's an application that sits on top of an application that sits on top of a technology. And we call that App 2.0. And we are now seeing this in blockchain, where we've got applications sitting on top of Bitcoin, which itself is an application sitting on top of the blockchain. Okay, why was it created? I think if we look at anything in this world, when we go to the extreme left or to the extreme right, we need to find a balance. And unfortunately, for the last 1,000 years, we've been dictated and controlled by money. And we need a system where we are not controlled anymore. So why did Bitcoin come about? Is because someone went, guys, this isn't right. In my opinion, we need an alternative. Okay, and if you look back in history, basically Bitcoin wouldn't exist today if the cell phone networks had have just played nice with each other. Why? Because the biggest virtual currency in the world is airtime. Bitcoin fulfills the exact same role that airtime fulfills. The only reason why airtime and why we don't trade in airtime is because the networks don't like each other. And there's no consensus on the actual value between networks, because I go and buy 55 Rand Vodacom airtime, and is that equivalent to a 49 Rand MTN voucher? Where's the distinction in value? And at the same time, I don't have a mechanism to draw that money out. So there's no medium of exchange between actual fiat, between the virtual currency and the fiat currency. But Bitcoin today wouldn't exist if the networks literally 15 years ago all sat down and said, guys, let's allow people to draw money out, and let's allow people to trade airtime across networks. Probably the biggest mistake mobile networks have ever made. But why couldn't they do it? Is because they went to the Reserve Bank, and MTN tried this. They said, we want to start a bank. And they said, no, you're a mobile network operator, you've got a network license. So they said, okay, we'll partner with Standard Bank, and we'll try to do mobile banking through Standard Bank. And the guys went, no, not really. I think you're trying to like wangle us around and get a banking license through Standard Bank. And it kind of all collapsed at the end of the day. Okay, who created it? So there is a pseudonym surrounding the creation of the blockchain technology. And most of you probably know, it's Satoshi Nakamoto. Okay, and we don't know who that person is. And that's then when I'm going to talk about what makes Bitcoin and blockchain genius. Okay, if I was to go and create a system that is going to challenge the current banking economic system of the world, am I going to tell everyone about it? No, because what's going to happen? You become a target. So I'll give you an example. I studied with a guy that he's still to this day the only guy I know that's left South Africa because of bandwidth. Most people leave because of crime or because of job opportunities or because the sun is hot here in Australia. We leave for various reasons. He left South Africa because of bandwidth, because he had a challenge with a friend of his to download the internet onto one physical drive. And he could only do that via working for Google or working for Microsoft. So he went and worked for Microsoft. And he had access to a tier 1 line, and he nearly got there. He downloaded everything except the .org domains. And then he had two guys on his front porch one day with shotguns, and they said, we know what you're doing, you better stop. And he was like, it's for research, it's for research. We always claim for research when we've done something wrong. Or when a shotgun's in your face. But in essence, when you download the internet, you become Google. Nobody wants another Google, so you become a competitor. So if I'm going to go and create this new system that's going to challenge the current economic banking sector, I don't want anyone to know who I am. That's the first part. Okay, what problem is it actually solving? So we've had, and we do have digital currencies. We all bank online, we all do EFTs, we all buy airtime, we buy electricity, all virtual currencies already exist. So what problem is blockchain actually solving? It's solving something called the double spending problem. So in essence, in a digital environment, I can do what they call a replay of a transaction. I can replay attack something, which means I just simply repeat the transaction in a fraction of a millisecond so that it arrives at the receiving end at the exact same point in time. And there's no way of knowing or proving that that transaction was duplicated. So if I send someone 20 Rand and at the exact same time I send 20 Rand, I still only have 20 Rand, but now the receiver's got 40. And that's been the biggest problem on the internet with digital money. So blockchain, in essence, if anyone says to you, what is blockchain? Blockchain is the solution to double spending. That's it. Okay. What is hash-based proof of work? Okay, I think we understand the concept of work because we've all got timesheets and we fill them in and we get a reward for doing that work. So in essence, what we are doing is we're saying to the computer, if you do work and you can prove that you've done that work, you are going to get incentivized for contributing to this particular blockchain. So in essence, what we are saying is, go and chop a tree down outside. When I can physically see that you've chopped that tree down, I will give you the reward for chopping that tree down. Okay, and in digital terms, we call that hash-based proof of work, which we'll go through a little bit. Why is Bitcoin called a cryptocurrency? Well, first of all, it's not a currency. So I don't know where that came from. The crypto part comes in, cryptographic techniques that are used, and we'll also go through those, used in ensuring that someone has done work and also ensured that I am paying the correct person and that person receiving the money is the correct person that should be receiving the money. Okay, so let's go and look at why I think this is genius. But before we get there, my definition of genius is very different to everyone else's definition. So the kind of definition we all have is you're exceptionally intelligent, you're a person with skill in an area of activity. That is the kind of consensus on the definition of genius. My definition is being able to see the future before it happens and prepare for it. Okay. One example is the New York Central Park. If anyone's been to New York and walked around Central Park, for me that is genius. In 1857, the guy saw that this is going to become one of the biggest metropolises in the world, and people need a place to go and sit and look at green things. That's genius. Okay. First part, like I said, anonymous creator for Bitcoin Genius. It is already designed for quantum computing. I don't know about you, but no one's even really got quantum computing in their mindset yet on what exactly it is. But it is designed such that when quantum computing comes about, we still won't be able to break it. Okay. There are exactly 2 to the power of 160 possible addresses so long as we keep using what they call elliptical curve cryptography. So that is the whole long number for 2 to the power of 160. And it is estimated there are 10 to the power of 50 atoms making up planet Earth. So in essence, there are more private keys available in blockchain and Bitcoin than there are atoms on planet Earth. So when people say, just quickly hack and brute force a private key, it is designed such that, and they look right now, if you use the world's computational power right now to go and try and brute force one of those keys, it will take you 2 million years. So when quantum computing comes about, it's still going to take a very long time. Okay. So what are the chances of finding randomly a private key? Virtually none. And you can go and do those calculations. Okay. I don't know why that is there. Let's go and look at some other part of the genius for me. So we use an algorithm called SHA-256. It's a standard algorithm available all over the world. And what a hashing algorithm essentially does is take arbitrary input, passes it through this algorithm, and receives standard output. What we mean by standard output is the size is standard. So out of a SHA-256, we are guaranteed always, independent of the input, a 32-byte output. And if we go and represent that as a hash, okay, as what we see as a block, and I'll go and show you guys the blockchain in a little bit, we go and represent that as 32-byte output as a hexadecimal value. Okay. Where are we now in terms of how big the blockchain network right now, how many hashes are taking place? And we can think about a hash almost in this case as throwing a dice. If I say to you, here's a dice, please go and throw a 6, we can all agree you've got a 1 in 6 chance that you're going to go and throw a 6. If I say to you, here are 2 die, please go and throw 2 6s simultaneously, we can agree the probability of that happening is 1 over 6 times 1 over 6. Now I say to you, here are 256 die, please go and throw a 6 simultaneously on all 256. We can agree that's going to take you a very long time. Okay. Unless you can throw that die quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. And this is what's happening in the blockchain network. We are trying to hash quicker and quicker and quicker, because when you hash quicker, you are going to go and solve a block. When you go and solve the block, you are going to go and get a reward or be incentivized for helping solve all of these unvalidated transactions. Okay, so where we're right now, the hash rate is at 53 ear hashes, which basically means 53 times 1024 petahashes times 1024 terahashes times 1024 gigahashes times 1024 megahashes times 1024 terahashes times 1024 kilahashes times 1 per second. happening right now on the blockchain network. So when people say, blockchain's just a small thing happening in the background, there is a lot of computational energy going towards solving or validating transactions and fulfilling the role of a bank, because that's what a bank essentially does. It's a third-party mechanism to validate transactions. But now we can't rely on the bank, we're relying simply on a system to do that for us. Okay. And if we look at how difficult this is, basically that's how many hashes, what is that, 7 odd trillion, maybe more. That's how many hashes we have to do per second on average in order to try and find a block every 10 minutes. So we'll go through some of the other nice things and the more in details. The next part of the genius is every transaction can be traced back to its origins. What does that mean? It means every amount of money in the blockchain, in the Bitcoin network, derives from its source. Okay, so every transaction is linked to a previous transaction. So what does this mean? If I receive 3 Bitcoin from someone and 2 Bitcoin from someone else, and I have 5 Bitcoin in total, that 5 Bitcoin can be traced back to the 2 and the 3. And the 3 and the 2 can also be traced back to their origins. So for every output, or every output forms part of the input of the next transaction. And every input creates an output that is then forms part of the new input for the next transaction. Okay, so that for me is quite ingenious in its setup. Okay, so let's just quickly look at the proof of work puzzle. So essentially what we are doing is we are saying, here's a message. We need to go and hash that message. I then get a result. Does this result meet a specific target? If it does, you have proven you have done the work. If it doesn't, you need to go and rehash. Okay, in layman's terms with the dice, please go and throw a 6. You throw the dice and you get a 3. You haven't met your target. Your target is to throw a 6. So you have to keep throwing the dice until you meet your target. And this is how the blockchain ensures that you are doing work. And there's no disproving that, because mathematically and cryptographically we can check whether you've done the work or not. There's no faking whether you've done work. Okay, so Bitcoin genius. Okay, and excuse my French. It is modeled on a sheep shitting grass. Why do I say that? Because it is cyclic in nature. It's the best model in the world. It is self-sustaining. Why? If we go and look at all the numbers, 21 million Bitcoin will only ever be produced. So by limiting its number, we automatically create a scarce resource. When we create a scarce resource and we compare it to something like gold, because we only know there's so much gold on planet Earth, we are ensuring that this object is deflationary in nature. Okay, and this is why you'll always hear Bitcoin will always, or there's targets for Bitcoin, what it will be priced at down the line. Bitcoin is deflationary, and if you go and look at the chart of gold, and you go and look at the chart of Bitcoin, they are very similar. And they always have an upwards trajectory. Why? Because you are pegging it against an inflationary object, fiat, so it will always diverge at the end of the day. Okay. Yeah, plus minus every 10 minutes, we should find a block. So if I give you that dice and I ask you to throw it, plus minus every 6 throws, you should get a 6. So the same thing applies in the blockchain network. Every 2016 blocks, we adjust the difficulty. So we see how many people are adding to the computational power, how many hashes are being added to the network. And what we are doing is ensuring that no one can dominate or manipulate the network. So this happens every 2016 blocks. What we have seen over history, since the start of blockchain, the blockchain network increases plus minus 5% every 2 weeks. Because we find 2016 blocks plus minus every 13.5 days. Which is insane. If you go and look at the numbers, pretty much we are adding to the blockchain network around $50 million worth of equipment every week. Okay, when people say it's not really going anywhere, I don't know who's got $50 million to add every week. to the network and the computational power. Then it gets a little bit more interesting. Every 210,000 blocks, we halve the reward. So what does that mean? When we started the blockchain in 2009, the reward for solving a block or validating transactions was 50 Bitcoin per block. Every 4 years or 210,000 blocks, we halve that reward. So it became 25 in the year 2012. In 2016, it became 12.5. That's where we are right now. So if you solve a block on the blockchain, on the blockchain network, you are going to get 12.5 Bitcoin right now. Okay. Why do I say that part is genius? Because we are enforcing a deflationary object. And if you go and look at something similar like gold, when we looked for gold in the 1900s, it was all on the surface, and we went there with a pick and a shovel and a pan. It was easy to find. Now we have to go, and apparently the deepest gold mine is in South Africa. It's at 4.5 kilometers. I don't know, some of the engineering guys I'm sure can confirm that. So we have to spend more money, more resources, in order to go and get the same commodity at the end of the day. And what we are doing there is no one is going to sell gold for less than what it costs them to go and get. So the same principle applies in Bitcoin. It becomes harder and harder to get, and it becomes a scarcer and scarcer resource, but it is fulfilling the need to go and push out all the coins in a quick manner and then reducing that exposure over time. Okay, so basically it means the last Bitcoin will be mined in the year 2140 when we're all dead. So at the very least, it's not even designed for us. It's not even designed for our kids. It's probably designed for our grandkids and our great-grandkids. And probably New World Order might be determined by something your great-great-great-great-grandfather did. All right. 1 Bitcoin, here's the next part of a bit of genius, is we all have a 2-decimal system in the sense that we've got rands and cents. In Bitcoin, it is designed such that it has 8 decimal points, or 100 million satoshis, or the decimal part of Bitcoin is equal to 1 Bitcoin. So in the future, we're not going to be dealing with 1 or 2 or 3 Bitcoins. We'll be dealing with fractions of the cents of Bitcoin. Okay? Last part of the genius for me is when we started Bitcoin, part of the draw to it was we can go and trade at 0 fees. It's not going to cost us to transact. And that transaction fee is determined by whoever's sending the transaction, which is a good draw card, because if I have to send money overseas, I have to get Reserve Bank clearance, say for example for 300,000 Rand. I have to go and book a 3-day spot forward rate. I then have to go to the bank, I have to produce an invoice, I have to give my ID. They then send the money, which takes probably around 7 days to complete that transaction, and I get charged 250 Rand flat fee plus a percentage of the total amount. So at the end of the day, it takes 7 days, and it costs me a lot of money relative to how much money I'm sending. If you are using Bitcoin, you can send that money in 10 minutes or less, and at 0 cost. So there's the draw card. But what happens with any network is more and more transactions come in, and we need to start prioritizing those transactions. How do we prioritize transactions? We let the end user choose how much they are willing to pay for priority in the network. And then whoever finds the block that validates that transaction also gets the fees associated with that transaction. So what does that mean? It means when I find the block, I get my 12.5 Bitcoin, plus then I get the fees associated with all the transactions inside that block. What does this mean? Ultimately, in the year 2140, everyone's going, but then blockchain is dead. No, it's not, because the reward will never be 0. It will always tend towards 0. And they say in the year 2140, there will be enough transactions with enough fees to equal 50 Bitcoin. Okay, so what we have done here is creating a self-evaluating, self-adjusting, never-ending system. It is a sheep shitting grass. And that, for me, is genius. Okay, who can we believe? Okay, so here's some stories just from guys that I think we can believe, and comments that will apply to blockchain and Bitcoin. So Steve Wozniak, who's that? Apple guy, he said Bitcoin is amazing, but blockchain is a bubble. He is, in my opinion, 100% correct. Bitcoin is amazing. Blockchain is a bubble. Why? Because I can go and create my own blockchain in 1 hour. If you are technically savvy, you copy the code, you go and deploy it, and off you go. So this is exactly what's happening. Everyone in the world thinks, I'm going to get rich now. I'm just going to go and create my own blockchain, launch it, and I'm going to become wealthy. And we've seen this time and time again with ICOs, and I'll go through some examples when we hit the website. Problems cannot be solved with the same mindset that created them. Okay, so a lot of people, particularly in the banking sector, are anti-blockchain. Why are they anti-blockchain? Because it is anti-everything a bank stands for. It's not controlled, it's self-maintained, it will continue forever. When I say no one's hacked it, everyone's tried, and in the 4th of July 2015, there was a worldwide attack on the blockchain. For me, there's only 4 companies in the world that can do that. It's Google, Microsoft, Sony, and Amazon. My money is on Google. Why? Because Google has enough computational power, and at that stage, and it's the 4th of July, which is Independence Day in America, so it must be an American company. But for me, Google at that stage was saying, guys, we're going to go and create our own blockchain, because that's what Google does. Email's not good enough, we're going to create our better email. Search is not good enough, we're going to go and create a better search. Blockchain isn't good enough, we'll create a better blockchain. And I think they tried to break it, and they literally got halfway, meaning they broke 3 blocks out of the 6 that are needed to be broken. So if Google got halfway, I don't think anyone else is going to break it. Okay. The best for the group comes when everyone in the group does what is best for himself and the group. And this, for me, is what blockchain stands for. It's not owned by anyone. It's decentralized. It's not controlled. It's self-evaluating, self-sustaining, will continue forever. So what does that mean? It creates this balance. Yes, we will still have banks. Yes, we will still have debt. But we've got an alternative to transact, and we've also got an alternative in the sense that no one can control the way we transact and the fees associated with those transactions. Okay. Who can't we believe? Well, we definitely can't believe JP Morgan. So here's the story. If we all know JP Morgan, the American government said you guys were caught out. I think it was for, let's call it insider trading, and they were fined $4 billion. Do you guys remember that? And pretty much around the same time, their CEO came along and said, Bitcoin is the biggest scam ever. It's a fraud. And what happened? The Bitcoin price dropped substantially. But what they didn't tell you, and this is a conspiracy theory, but it kind of, for me, holds true, someone shorted the Bitcoin price and made $4 billion. So for me, if you are in that position, you can influence the markets. I've been caught out, I need $4 billion. What do? Oh, this new technology, which everyone is in this high sensitive mode of it is so volatile and panic mode. And what do? You say something like that, the price drops and you make all your money back. You can't believe any ICO. Why do I say this? I'm not saying all ICOs are bad. What is an ICO? An initial coin offering. I'm creating my own blockchain. And I've done that. I created Madiba coin. Officially South Africa's first cryptocurrency 4 years ago. What happened? Well, the first thing, I got a letter from the Nelson Mandela Foundation saying, I'm infringing on the trademark Madiba. Okay. But before we even got there, 2 weeks later, our blockchain was broken. Why? Because when you start your own blockchain, people don't like it. And they can push more computational power than your network has, and they can break you. So before we even got to the legal ramifications of using the word Madiba, our blockchain was broken. So now no one wants to go and create their own blockchain, so they'll go and use something like Bitcoin and Ethereum's like this, where we go and use other blockchains, so we don't have to run it, and we can then try and make money off it. So here are some examples. One for me, a classic one, Rhino coin. It's all over the news. Guys, we're going to save the rhino through crypto. Brilliant concept. If you go and actually look at the code, for every 1 rand you donate, the guy who created it takes 45 cents. Brilliant, that's going to save the rhino. No, it's not. It's just making one individual rich based on the social perception that you are helping someone. And that unfortunately gives crypto a very bad name. Why? Because there are greedy people in the world. That's essentially what it is. So don't trust anyone that is creating an ICO. Why go and create a new coin when Bitcoin can do everything for you? Okay, and we literally have 4,000 alternative coins out in the space. Why go and use it? If it's fundamentally not doing anything different from Bitcoin, it makes no sense. And all it is a hype mechanism to tell you, this is the new greatest thing, please invest your money here. And I know a lot of guys that have got burnt, where they take their Bitcoin, sell it, and go and get involved in a new magical coin, and it tanks, and all they've done is lost their initial wealth and value. Okay? Don't believe your friends around the bra, because now suddenly we're all crypto experts. Yeah, if you do this and you trade like this, and you're gonna become rich. This isn't a rich money-making scheme. This is a fundamental shift in how we transact and who controls how we transact and how money is perceived in the world and how we create and keep wealth. That is fundamentally why the system was created. But obviously people turn it into money-making schemes and Ponzi schemes, and you're going to become rich overnight and give me all your money. Unfortunately, that is how the world works. Okay, who paid the ultimate price? Time's up. Ooh, okay, so then we'll have to go quickly. Maybe I'll leave this. I'll just talk quickly about some other things. T shorter, maybe about five minutes. Who paid the ultimate price? There was a website called Silk Road. Okay, Ross Ulrich, for running that website, which allowed people to do and trade via Bitcoin on his platform. He got 2 life sentences plus 40 years for running a platform where he didn't do anything bad. People on the platform did bad things. Okay, we've got people in this country that shot other people 4 times through the bathroom door and got 7.5 years, and someone got 2 life sentences plus 40 years for running a website. And then what was also interesting on this case, the FBI agents later were caught stealing Bitcoin off the platform, and they also got 10 years. Okay, so it kind of shows you where we are in the world. New additions, you may have heard, I'll go through them quickly. Lightning Network. So basically, Lightning Network is an off-chain solution to speeding up Bitcoin transactions. So in essence, we are bulk processing. That's all we're doing. The banks have done it. Atomic swaps basically means we can swap cross-chain, meaning I can send you Litecoin and you can receive Bitcoin vice versa without any middleman involved. Okay, so let's just quickly go and look at what this was all about, is how can we go and define what Bitcoin is. So we now know a little bit about it, and we struggle with how to find a definition for something that is new. So in trying to find a definition, we can always go and look at what it is not and argue the points on a definition. So Bitcoin is not a commodity. We can go and argue that. We can say it is not a share. Why? Because it's not issued by a company in a private or public capacity. It's not a bearer bond. It's not issued by government. It is not a currency because it actually has value. Okay. It's not a penny stock, and some people call it a new asset class, which literally has no definition. So for me, the closest I've come to defining Bitcoin is as digital treasure. Why do I say this? Because in maritime law, basically, if you find something in the open ocean, you don't need to disclose it. It is yours. It's finders keepers at the end of the day. So for me, Bitcoin is more like treasure, because if we go and solve a block and find something, we are then finding treasure in the digital world. What is the South African Reserve Bank stance on it? They've only ever released 2 reports on what Bitcoin is. The first report said absolutely nothing other than it is something we don't know and it is volatile. You take your chances. That was the first release from the South African Reserve Bank. The most recent one is they've said it is a token. Okay, so if we go and look at the definition of a token, it is a representation, a physical representation of something that we already have. But if we don't know what this thing is, how can we create a token that is a representation of it? So even the word token in this case makes no sense. Okay, so we still can't go and define it. Another definition for me, which is kind of close to what it could become, is an inflation hedge. In essence, if we know we've got an inflationary object and a deflationary object, we need both of those to find a medium, a middle ground, if you want to call it that. So there is my abstract. That's the starting point for my paper. And then officially my title. So we've gone reverse. Okay. I think I just want to show you guys a few things, and then I think we can break for tea. And if you've got any questions, I'm available.
If I want to, for instance, transfer money from South Africa to, let's say, Ukraine, and I have to work through the wallets, if the Ukraine government doesn't support Bitcoin, can that actually happen? Because through their banking system, through their wallet, it actually has to be like exchanged.
So for governments, here's the biggest problem, and I've given some lectures to the Reserve Bank in particular, and they're not concerned with stopping cryptocurrencies. They are concerned on how do we report on it. Because if you can't report on a cryptocurrency, you can't add it to your GDP, which then determines how much money gets dropped into the economy. So in essence, if you've got a Bitcoin wallet, I have no idea where in the world that Bitcoin wallet is sitting. So quite literally, it could be sitting in China, it could be sitting in the US. I physically could be in South Africa, and this is how I've done it. My wallets are all over the world. But unless I divulge what I have in those wallets, no one will know I have those Bitcoins. And that is part of the problem for government, is trying to come up with how do we know where that money physically sits. So what is the jurisdiction on it, and how do we determine that? Because the whole setup is anonymous in nature, there's no way of knowing. So there's been some guys that have said, okay, we'll adopt the Swiss banking model, where all bank accounts are private, and we go and tax the bank. We don't tax the individual. And there's been proposals to do exactly that. We go and tax the Bitcoin system. We can't tax the individual because we don't know who they are. The problem then becomes it's a world tax. And how do we distribute that world tax amongst all the nations? And how do we know maybe China's got more wallets than South Africa, for example, but they're then getting a portion of the tax associated with the number of wallets. So that is probably for government's biggest headache. You're trying to regulate something that has specifically been designed to be unregulated.
Okay, you already covered it, the issue of quantum computing.
Yep.
But why then is there such a huge narrative saying that quantum computing is a threat to Bitcoin?
I'll show you right now. That kind of ties in nicely here. Okay, so this is the blockchain as it stands. There's a few things we can see here. We can see how many blocks we've added. We can see which pool created it or found it. We can see the size of the block, which relates to the number of transactions in that. We'll see the 12.5 plus 0.2 is the fee, so that's the reward. And we'll see the block hash. Okay, so remember I said to you in the beginning, if I've got dice and you need to throw a 6, part of your target is to reach a block hash that has a number of prepending zeros. Okay, if we go and ask for the remainder of this hash to all be zeros, it will take quantum computing to go and calculate that. So it has been designed, if we go and look at this in mathematical terms, every digit you add there is 15 factorial. Okay, and we've still got probably around 30 digits. So it's 15 factorials to go and find the solution for the next block. Does that make sense? So in essence, even if quantum computing is 100 times more efficient than current computing, this will still sustain that amount of computational power.
Yeah, I understand that. I understood it the first time you said it.
Yeah.
My question is, why is the narrative then saying that quantum computing is
Going to solve
threat.
world peace. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the perception, is quantum computing is going to solve everything. P versus NP problem. We don't know until we get there. But there is theoretical people looking at that and specifically just looking at numbers to say whether this is going to actually happen or not. But we don't yet have the technology, so we won't be able to know until we're there. But from my side, it's already been designed. I mean, nobody thinks like that. When we were designing a system in 2008, we have to design this for 1,000 years' time. And I think they have done that. Cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm desolated to have to call this session to an end, the keynote. Thank you very much indeed, Neil, for an absolutely wonderful keynote.
Cool, thanks.
I'll just give you some wine.
Sure, thanks.